let's take a quick look at RNA. This is, of course, DNA's little cousin. It's actually one of the three major biological macromolecules that are essential for all life. Now, of course, this is life as we know it currently, right? So we have DNA. We need DNA for life. We also need RNA. And we need proteins. All right, so these are the three major biological macromolecules essential for all known life. What we have is DNA is the code that supplies the code. It's the information molecule. And this code that we're talking about gives us RNA. That code gets translated by RNA. So then that RNA takes the information out of the nucleus to where we make the proteins. Okay, so DNA is the information molecule. It's got the code, but DNA is in the nucleus. Proteins aren't made in the nucleus. They're made outside of the nucleus, over at ribosomes. So we have to have a molecule to take the information from the nucleus out to the ribosomes and make some protein. That's where RNA comes in. In fact, there are a few different types of RNA, which I'll make another video on protein synthesis, and we'll cover that then. But for right now, we're just going to be looking at RNA. Now, Na, well, that's nucleic acid, same as from DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. So the only difference here is that we're still using the ribo sugar, but it's not deoxy. Okay, so RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, in much the same way that DNA stood for deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, so RNA, we have our ribonucleic acid. Now, let's take a quick look at how it differs from DNA, because it does differ from DNA in 4 ways. Number 1, the first way that RNA is different from DNA is that it is single-stranded. It is a single-strand molecule. DNA is, of course, a double strand. If we were drawing DNA, let's draw DNA over on the right, we draw one strand, and we draw another strand. It's double-stranded. But when we draw RNA over here on the left, we just draw one strand. Okay, so that's the first big thing, big way in which RNA is different from DNA. It's not double-stranded, it's just single-stranded. Now, Khaleesi sometimes wears her hair, half as RNA and half as DNA, as we see here. So down on the right-hand side, we've got this double-stranded looking molecule, and on the left-hand side, it looks like just a single-stranded. So she's wearing RNA on the left of this photo, so on her right, and she's wearing her hair as DNA on the right of the photo, so on her left. Alrighty, let's move on to how else RNA is different from DNA. Another way that RNA is different from DNA, I'm putting this as number 2. There's no particular order. There are just 4 ways. It's not like single-stranded is the most important way that it's different, and this is the second most important way that it's different. No, it's just 4. This just happens to be what's coming to my head as I'm jotting stuff down. So RNA is short. It is much, much shorter than DNA, right? Shorter, actually much shorter. So DNA, chromosomes, right? The DNA is packaged up as chromosomes. Now, they can be anywhere from 46 million all the way up to 246 million base pairs long. Now, when I say base pair, I am, of course, talking nucleotides, right? But the nucleotide has a base as part of it. So really it's nucleotides, but people often talk about just base pairs long. No, they say the human genome is like 3 billion base pairs long, or 3 billion bases long. What they mean is 3 billion nucleotides. But that's how we can talk. We can say bases long, either or. So yeah, chromosomes, they're really long, right? They are really long for a start, at least 46 million bases long or nucleotides long, but they get up to the longest one, the first chromosome. It's actually 246 million base pairs long, or 246 million nucleotides long. Crazy long. RNA, on the other hand, we all already know that it's much shorter. RNA is about from 100 to 10,000. Comma on that, there we go. From 100 to 10,000 bases long. Okay, so it can get quite long. 10,000 bases, that's still quite a long molecule. There's a lot of code in there, but it's so much shorter than DNA. right? So that's another way that RNA is different from DNA. Right, let's go for another one. Number 3, remember, not in any order, just how they're popping into my head. The RNA uses this, a U. Now, U is for uracil. It uses a U where DNA uses that, thymine, right? So we've got our 4 bases for DNA. Okay, so if we have DNA, we'll do the DNA on the left this time. We've got our A, and A matches with a T. We've also got a C, and C matches with a G. So adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Those are the 4 bases. Those are our 4 options to make the code, right, for this information molecule. RNA has adenine, has cytosine, has guanine, doesn't have thymine. So it uses uracil instead. So RNA has uracil, tick, doesn't have thymine. So it uses uracil, the base uracil instead of thymine. So the code for RNA is A matches with U and C matches with G. Now, these 2 molecules are actually very, very similar. If we were going to draw them, and we're not going to draw the full structure, but we do have a hexagonal ring. We've got an oxygen, a couple of oxygens, double bonded sticking off. We've got a methyl group. Now, a methyl group is CH3. I've written it HC3, but we say CH3. It's just that the bond has to go to the carbon, right? Now, this is thymine. And if we were wanting to draw uracil, we would essentially draw the same thing. These, of course, have some nitrogen as well. There's actually a nitrogen here, and there's a nitrogen here, a couple of nitrogens. Remember, the bases are properly termed nitrogenous bases, right? We often just say bases, but nitrogenous base, it's just got some nitrogen in its structure. We don't really need to go into the structure of these things. I'm just showing that what I've drawn now is uracil. It is very, very similar to thymine. It just doesn't have this methyl group, the CH3. All right, so uracil, no CH3, no methyl group sticking off the ring. Okay, so very similar structures. Not that you really need to go into the structure. Not many people worry about the actual structure differences of uracil and thymine, but that is the difference anyway, right? Just the lack of methyl, and now we call it uracil. Cool, that's 3 ways. Another way that RNA is different from DNA, well, remember in its name, it's number 4, there we go. It's ribonucleic acid, right, for our RNA. Our DNA was deoxyribonucleic acid. Well, RNA is no longer deoxy. So what the heck does this mean? Well, let's draw a nucleotide. We start with the sugar, I think is the easiest way to start. And after, remember we number the carbons, 1 prime, 2 prime, 3 prime, 4 prime. We've got a 5th carbon sticking up the side off the ring, so 5 prime. Off the 1st prime carbon, that's where we have our base. Off the 5th prime carbon, that's where we have our phosphate group. And that's a nucleotide, right? This is deoxy ribonucleotide because we do not have an oxygen at the 2nd carbon. We've just got the hydrogen. Okay, so remember, a good little sugar will have lots of these OH groups sticking off it. And that, by the way, is an H. Doesn't quite look like one, but it is. There we go. Good sugars have these hydroxyl group. OH is a hydroxyl group. But at the 2nd carbon, at the 2 prime carbon, there's no oxygen there. For DNA, that's why it is deoxyribonucleic acid. Well, in this case, we're actually drawing ribonucleic acid. So instead of being deoxy, actually, there is an oxygen at the 2 prime carbon, right, at the 2nd carbon as we go around the ring. So that's another way that RNA differs from DNA, is that it's got the 2 prime hydroxyl group. There is an OH group at the 2nd carbon position. Okay, so there's 4 ways that RNA is different from DNA. Number 1, what did we say? We said single strand. Okay, RNA is not single strand. RNA is a single-stranded molecule. Also, it's shorter, relatively short, much shorter than DNA, right? 100 to 10,000 bases long, whereas DNA, 46 million to 246 million bases long. Crazy long for DNA, much shorter for RNA. The third thing we said was that it has a U instead of a T. It has uracil instead of thymine. And the fourth thing we said is that at the 2' position, so at the second carbon, there is a hydroxyl group, an OH group. Okay, so there we go. 4 ways that DNA's little cousin RNA differs from DNA. Still very, very important. Remember, DNA to RNA to proteins, all right? So it's a very important biomolecule, right, in terms of life as we know it. Very, very important. In fact, actually, we don't know which one came first. We don't know if, very early life, if DNA was a thing and then RNA became a thing to help produce proteins, etc., or if the first molecule was RNA was the first molecule of life, and then a little while later, maybe 2 RNAs hooked up, and now it's double-stranded. Now it's DNA. We don't know. Okay, science is great. Science is awesome, but science doesn't know everything. All right, but that's the great thing about science. Science doesn't pretend to know everything. Okay, so there's still lots and lots to figure out. But there we go. 4 ways that RNA differs from DNA. Video done.
Don't forget to hit the like button. Yeah. And subscribe to It's Up Here. And here's another video.